Hey, this is Boaz. Thanks for showing up. Please visit the Fools and Sages podcast at foolsandsagespodcast.com. There are no spaces and it's all spelled out. You can find show notes, references, bios, merch, and other cool features. Contact us if you have feedback or a question, if you want to appear on the show, or if you want either or both of us to be a guest on your podcast. You can listen and subscribe on Spotify, YouTube, Rumble, Apple Podcasts, iHeart Podcasts, and anywhere else great podcasts are found. And follow us on X and Instagram. Support us on Patreon. The Patreon link's also in our website. And thank you. Enjoy the show. Hi, welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast, in which we fools attempt to bring ideas from philosophy and psychology to people who are interested in applying them in their own lives. I'm Boaz, and I've been a founder and executive in renewable energy businesses, and now I consult on transformation with various organizations.
And I'm Brian. Welcome to the Fools and Sages podcast. I'm a builder and an artist and a teacher and a backyard philosopher.
Thanks, Brian. So today is October 7th, 2024. It's 1 year since the pogrom carried out by Hamas in southern Israel. And there are still 101 hostages, presumably still alive in tunnels in Gaza. And we're in the middle of the Jewish high holidays. So Rosh Hashanah was last week, and Yom Kippur is at the end of this week. And that's a time of introspection. And even though this episode won't get published for a few weeks, we thought it would still be timely to go with the moment in terms of our content today. And in the episode we did on prayer, we talked a little bit about how one person's suffering is all of our suffering, and how that's true not only of the hostages, but of everybody related to the conflict on both sides. And I'll be honest, it's really hard for me to access that mindset when it comes to people who have committed to the destruction of Israel and the destruction of the Jewish people. And yet I know deep down that they are suffering too. So honestly, I'm struggling a little bit with that. And I
Yeah,
thought it
I
might
get it.
be interesting to talk more about it. And I'm sure compassion is part of this, and transcendence is part of this. And would love to hear your perspective this morning.
Yeah. Um, well, first of all, obviously, our heart goes out to all the people that have been touched by this and whose lives have been dramatically impacted by it. Of course, this morning, when I woke up, I started seeing things, sort of commemorating or remembering. Uh, and as I mentioned in our earlier conversation, the, as we ponder these sorts of things, I guess there's different ways, you can think about it logically and you can think about it analytically, but I also, this morning, I got flooded with different images. More of a montage of the human experience. And I think, one of the things I mentioned that bubbled up to the surface was the, analysis of the ruins at the Chaco Canyon and the Anasazi and the controversy controversy over, uh, accusations of alleged cannibalism, and on the part of archaeologists discovering, ruins and remains that indicate that. And, so this is an old thing that's been going on, and, there's definitely something about primate psychology going on here, and our encountering and our relationship with other, uh, the way, it's almost connect fear of other is in some ways, it's connected to fear of life. Humans have a mechanism, maybe a trigger system, and we saw this in Vietnam. We've seen this in probably every major conflict in the history of humans, where a switch gets tripped and the eyes roll back in the head, and we fully engage in our animal instincts. Or, the one of my martial arts teachers, he said, there's three levels of martial arts. One level we call the animal level, and then the next level is human level, and the third level is sage level or saint level. And the way he used to refer to the animal level was as firing the glands. So there's a very physiological response at a certain level that can be triggered. That is absolutely animal. It's probably all the way to reptile brain kind of stuff. And this is where the dialogue between, can when does reason stop and killing just take over? Is the line from the song uh, "Tales of Topographic Oceans" by Yes.
Okay.
And coming to terms with our I think I mentioned before the only moral question really, or the one that I think everything is reducible to, is how much suffering are we willing to put other people through for us to get what we want? And what we want can be expanded, want, need. Uh, there's a lot of nuance there, but Uh, yeah, we are, as we've said before, these creatures dangling between the beasts and the gods. And our psychology is only partially viewable by us. It's only partially grokkable. And so, I understand arguments for compassion, but I also have children. And I know the fierce instincts that I have to protect my own children. And, as the saying goes, I pity the fool who crosses that line, right? And this is that we spoke about Peterson. You need to be dangerous but under control. And part of that sage level of martial arts implies that the control is complete and that you're not firing the glands. Your awareness stays on top. And, I think we mentioned before when we were talking about the ability to sort of dissolve or transcend violence, it really has to do with personal power and awareness coming into those very difficult eyes rolled back moments.
Um, Speaking of Jordan Peterson, I read something yesterday that he said. I think he just quoted it on Twitter or X, nay Twitter. That was to the effect of, if you want to have a meaningful life, find the biggest burden you can carry and carry it. And uh, some of the things that you've said already today remind me of my visit to Dachau, the concentration camp in far eastern Germany. Oh, no, that one was not far from Munich. And I went into the memorial in the middle of the concentration camp, and I was the only person in the memorial. And so I was sitting in it, and it's below ground,
Yeah.
and there's like a black um, onyx or marble slab that extends up well above grade, and a tiny little um, point of light that comes down into the memorial. And I sat in there alone for probably half an hour. And when I emerged, I felt like I had a psychic machine gun and I was going to use it. The rage that I felt was like cosmic rage. And um, when when I hear an admonition like find meaning by carrying the biggest burden you can, and we're talking here about suffering, I'm thinking about suffering as a burden that we carry, and how do we carry that in a way that does make meaning. um Curious to hear your thoughts about that.
Yeah. Well, I know that I have had realizations around suffering in ceremonies, enough to realize that there is an art, if you will, to suffering. I felt like some of the things that we have helped people do in ceremonies is learn how to suffer in such a way that the suffering moves through them instead of stays.
Can you say
Uh,
more about that?
well, I think that we have a resistance to suffer just like we have a resistance to go through the difficult things in our lives, to have the difficult conversations that we need to have, to push ourselves through the parts that we know we have to go through, even though they won't be easy. And so, there's some points when that might come down to just getting out of bed every morning. Uh, but there is a purifying, like a sucking all the juice out of corporeality and the human experience. Like it wouldn't be real. It wouldn't be significant in the way that it is without suffering. I think that some of this is tangled up in the book of Job. Carl Jung did a whole thing, I think, trying to an answer to Job, maybe that was. And there is a mystery here. There absolutely is a mystery here, and it is about the transcension. I think about the Sundance and the transcension of that corporeality through courage and through the willingness to sacrifice. And that is really bundled up with experiencing suffering and acceptance of the whole package, and the only thing you can really say about that is that I know it's not easy, but it's okay. You will go through it. Something is served by it, and it has a potential to transform us in a way, and it certainly increases our compassion for all living things if we are if we experience it purely. Maybe let's say it that way. Uh, so I mean, this is not an easy one. This is absolutely not an easy one, and this is connected with our mortality, right? I've said before, when you're in a meat suit, you're going to go through some stuff, and so I like that song where it says, "No matter what tomorrow brings, my eyes, I'll be there, eyes open." Uh, there's a courage in facing suffering that ennobles us. Uh, and that's why we respect the chiefs, because they are willing to sacrifice, not because they're the biggest badasses, right? So, which I've said it any number of times. So,
Say
yeah.
say more about that. The chiefs being kind of archetypal leaders.
Sure. And we've talked about as your awareness expands, as you get cosmically smarter about things, your capacity to take on burdens, to take on responsibilities increases, but part of that is your ability to take care of other people. And so, I think that was kind of maybe part of the idea of the potlatch in the Northwest, is that you demonstrate your largesse, right? Your We used to have this old idea in the West that, boy, I would love to see revived. And the word is noblesse oblige. And it means the obligations of nobility. And that means that if we're really going to be aristos, right, the best, as in aristocracy, someone really wants to see themselves as aristocracy, it's not about how shiny you are, it's about how much you can take on, how much responsibility, how many people you can care for. That's one of the reasons I love Bob Marley, because he took care of, you know, thousands of people, and that was his intent. So that shows his pure heart, right? So this idea of nobility means that our capacity to take care of others is greater than when we started. Let's at least say that, so that we sort of transform our capacity to step up when someone needs to step up. That's this idea of service. We are, service is just one click over from suffering. And when we do it on behalf of other people, we are ennobled by that. And, I think they might say, well, we burn off karma, or we gain merit, right? Although within the Zen tradition, we say there's no merit. So, uh, there's something there. There's something there, and it's tangled up with the universal sorrow, with which we've mentioned. It's also, I mean, it's the mystery of our relationship with other people. And as we mentioned before, seeing ourselves and other people, and our other people within ourselves, and recognizing that the spark within us, that's God, is also within everyone else. And and then and then you try to wrap your head around something like what's going on. Say, like, what kind of a game is God playing with us? Right? And here we are, right again, back at the Bhagavad Gita with Krishna and Arjuna. What are we doing? Right? And I read Arjuna, or Krishna, saying, well, you just got to do it, as saying, well, we just have to go through the suffering. We just have to go through this really difficult learning process of love and loss, until until all of those lower tendencies are kind of purged out by that. I mean, that's the model. And I think that's the example that maybe has been set for us by people that have had higher illuminations,
I want to go back to a couple things you said. One, just for clarification, and two, to explore a little more. So, the clarification one is, you mentioned the potlatch in the Northwest. Can you just explain what that
Oh,
is?
yeah, yeah. There's a tradition amongst the Northwestern Native Americans where, if you're a person of prestige, that's sort of demonstrated by your ability to give gifts, and which is an overt way of taking care of other people. Uh, this is an extension of, uh, I mean, you put yourself in this headspace. We're all trying to survive. We're an extended family, and one guy's a really good fisherman. And so he comes back with all these fish. He can't eat all these fish. It's only logical that he takes care of his family, right? So if we're all family, which we are, whether we realize that or not in the individual cases, then we have to take care of each other. It's just that natural. Uh,
So, that's one of the things I wanted to explore a little more. It's it, rationally, I understand that we're all one family and that we benefit by taking care of everybody. But as you said, I have kids, and if anybody crosses that line, to quote Mr. T or B.A. Baracus, I pity the fool.
Yep,
And
yep,
and so there's like a well, but whoever harms your kids is family too, right? So
yep.
so I'm having really a hard time crossing that bridge right now. And I wonder if you could say more about that.
Uh, well, this is related to this other conversation that I find very interesting. That's a tangent to uh, how much suffering are you willing to have other people go through to get what you want? And that is, what are the rules that we are willing to apply to other people and expect them to obey? And this, of course, unfolds polity and uh, how we live together in society. Um, that's where we come back to this old Latin distinction between mal in se and mal prohibido, which I think we might have spoken of in previous, but maybe not on the episodes. But the distinction is an old one, which is why it's in Latin, and it's fundamental to law. And the idea of mal, of course, is bad, evil, and mal in se it means evil in itself. And the idea of mal and se is stuff that all people in all times would have considered evil, whether they were ancient, prehistoric people or modern people. And those are the things that we all tend to recognize: murder, rape, uh, physical assault, unprovoked, that is. Uh, things that a caveman or a Martian would have no trouble looking at and saying, oh, yeah, that is messed up. Right. And then we have this other category of things that are it's called mal prohibido. And that means that this is an evil that's been prohibited. And we might look at it in a way to say that that evil was a kind of defined into existence. A good example is in America, we drive on the right side of the road. There's nothing inherently evil like the people who live in countries that drive on the left side of the road. There's nothing inherently evil about that. It's a little weird. but but that's the idea of prohibido, and that is we've kind of all agreed to this because if we don't, a certain type of predictable chaos will ensue. And so it might be you don't park here on Fridays before 10 a.m. But if somebody does, it's not like you're gonna come up to him, "You evil mother," you know, he just parked there, But on the other hand, if he parked there over somebody, right? And then we cross into to Mal and say, and we say, "Okay, you're evil, you just ran over this guy," right? So so, we have to have certain, principles that allow us to work together, uh, and then there are things that are just unacceptable. Uh, you're not gonna get the Mr. T thing out of me if you park in front of one of my kids' houses and it's outside of the hours of official parking, right? You're gonna have to transcend into the mall and say kind of behavior, and those are just the things that we just have to establish to make things work. And if somebody is transcending those boundaries, we sort of have already collectively through almost all societies in history, I might argue. Maybe an anthropologist could wise me up about that. But it's like we as a collective sort of come to the conclusion that, okay, we got to put this mad dog down. And, one of my friends who was, he grew up in the Middle East in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan, something like that. And, his people were migratory and they lived in yurts and it was very, very hard winters. And he said that, if we see somebody in the summertime and they're not doing the preparations that they need to do to survive the winter, we know what's going to happen. He's going to get hungry. He's going to get desperate. and he's going to start looking at us because we did the work during the summertime. And then he's going to come and he's going to want to take it from us. And before we let it get to that point, we're going to put that mad dog down. That's what he told me. This is like a direct quote. And this is the old traditional way. So, the patron in New Mexico, not 20 miles from where I'm sitting, there was a hanging tree because there is a line. And we say that for our mutual pursuit of uh, happiness and prosperity, there's certain behaviors that we just have to say are beyond the pall, and we're not going to let them happen. And we have to get special people that are with special training to distinguish between these things. So this is not a problem that goes away, but it's a problem that we kind of need to face honestly. And what we really need to do is, as a philosophical anarchist, I would say if there's people that are committing these mal and say behaviors, there's something fundamentally wrong going on there with their relationship with their fellow humans. So we gotta fix that. We gotta go in there and we gotta figure out what we can. Now that's beyond our fixing and figuring out in a lot of cases. That's why we have a penitentiary. Also, not 20 miles down the road from me. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's a lot of issues there, and this is kind of what we've been working out from interclan, intertribe, intercity state, intervillage. Like there is a process at work here, and it does seem to be through the expansion of our capacity to take care of more stuff and more people. But we definitely have some bugs to work out. And I think there's both honest bugs and features disguised as bugs, which is a whole other side conversation too, yeah.
Okay. Let's come back to that. Um, the the things I thought maybe we could expand on a little. Um, One is you said service is just a click away from suffering. And I think what you meant there is that when we are of service, we're kind of taking on the suffering of others. Um, and I wanted to make sure I understood that correctly and see if like I haven't thought of service as one click away from suffering exactly before.
Mhm,
So it's just an interesting way of putting it.
mhm. Well, it's putting us out of our space and doing something for other people in a way that we will not see back, as a benefit to us necessarily. And that's this is so ingrained into the human psyche that the only reason you would ever do anything for somebody else is because you're gonna get something out of it. And so, like, when we were in Africa, they're like, "Well, you're doing this, right, because Jesus is gonna repay you, right? Or Allah is gonna repay you, right?" I'm like, "Nah, I'm not really thinking that way. I'm doing this because these little kids, I don't want their lives to suck." And that's all that can be the end of it, you know? I mean, I know that I could have been in a situation where my life would could have sucked a lot worse, and people stepped up and helped that, and I'm appreciative for that. And so it's appropriate for me to pay it back and pay it forward, right? Once I get how important that is, right? So so it's like one would like to think that in an enlightened society, we would be understanding and decoding when things go awry, and we would be have enough of these extra capacities to reach out and sort of fix it all up. But there's a different paradigm going down here now, and I think that this new paradigm has been trying to break through history. And I see like when you try to push a truck out of the mud, this is something in the Mesa we're very familiar with. And this is why I never liked automatic cars, right? I want forwards because I need to go forwards, but then I go backwards a little. And I got to go forwards again. And then I might even go backwards even farther before I finally get enough oomph to get out moving forward. And I think history does that a lot. And uh, so what would we say? History is without positration or something like that. So we could get stuck in these
History
ruts
doesn't
and
have chains. It's history is
exactly.
unchained. Yeah.
The wrong kind of chains of history. So So sometimes we do that, I think, as a race. And that might be connected to, we talked about this idea of energy states, and you try to get up to the next stable equilibrium state, but you don't quite have enough energy, so you fall down to the last stable equilibrium state. So with each try, not unlike our little amphibious friend, uh, we finally maybe get to that new energy state. And I think that that's what's happening collectively with our big, huge human self organizing system. And sometimes the gears grind, and we've been seeing a lot of gears grinding coming to wake up here.
I'm feeling that personally today. I
Yeah,
feel like there have been a lot of times when I have felt really clear and connected to everything being interconnected and the universal field and that being love and my relationship to that being joining. And man, today I'm not and,
yeah,
and i'm
yeah, I get
i'm
it.
trying to get there. And and you said earlier something about personal power. And you mentioned that in maybe a couple of other episodes prior. And I wonder if that's worth describing a little more. What do you mean by personal power? Is that the same as what you just said about accessing higher frequencies and higher energetic states? Because when you say it, I feel a very kind of physical resonance with it also, that there's like
Yeah,
a kidney jing part to that. And actually, you know what I'm thinking about with that, a sermon that Rabbi David Ingber gave on Rosh Hashanah focused on the words lo and od. And when you put them in that order, lo od, it means no more, no more, as in, please God, no more. We've taken all we can take.
bastante, yeah.
And when you flip the order, od lo, it means not yet, as in, we're not done yet. And just hearing that inversion of the words and resonating so strongly with the not yet, and it reminding me of that little bead of light in the memorial at Dachau that's like, don't even see it at first, but it's
Uh-huh,
up there,
yeah.
and you can access it. Um,
That reminds me of the Sipapu in Akiva. That is the light, right, of the next world that we're not yet born into. And then we come out from the Kiva as the idea, and now you're born into the world.
yeah. So that sense of not yet, I feel in my belly. I feel physically. And you mentioned courage, and I think courage is connected to this idea of personal power also. And it's like we have a limitless amount of courage if we can only access it. At least that's my experience so far.
Yeah,
Maybe that
I think
fades as
some
our
push-ups
kidney
are
thing
involved.
fades. But yeah, so maybe
Yeah,
personal power as a theme here.
yeah. Well, it's interesting. I've studied a lot of mystics and yogis and some of these yogis that were really amping at a high level. If we think about this almost from a Reichian therapy standpoint, where we talk about body segments and energetic segments that move energy through them, and that as we are impacted, the capacity to move energy is diminished. Uh, so Gurdjieff referred to the organ kunda buffer, buffering that kundalini energy that wants to move up and down. Well, it seems that if a saint or a yogi, a sage is at a high enough level, it's as if their centers are transmitting energy at these different vibrational levels. So people would sit in their presence, not even share a language, so they don't understand a word the person is saying. But the blockage, say, on their heart center is the energy underneath that blockage is in sympathetic vibration with the open heart center of the master. and by the virtue of that sympathetic vibration, that person's heart center opens. So so there is that type of influence. And I know that when we look back in history, there were clearly people that had made a break and had that kind of juice. And so when they show up, all of a sudden people are like operating out of their higher selves rather than their lower selves. And that's a saint. That's what a saint does. And uh so the idea that if you can come into a position enough personal power, and maybe that's a capital P, as you say, maybe that personal power is lent from the universe. But the point is that person isn't out of the way, or isn't in the way of it, rather, so that they can convey it all. So that person can go into a situation of locked up lower energies and dissolve it. That's not that miraculous in between two fighting situations, right? You got two kindergartners that are scrapping, and the teacher comes, and through her personal power, she says, "Hey, yo," and she grabs them both by the scruff of the neck, and she said, "This is the way it's going to be," right? That was personal power, and it totally resolved the conflict. Now, when we talk about nation states, that requires a saint. and or people of enormous personal influence that can make, for example, make two opposing people sit down to the same table and bring their understanding to a higher level. I think we talked about it, and I don't know if it was one of the episodes that made it, about that idea of what appears as an incontrovertible dichotomy on one level. When seen from one dimension higher, that apparent dichotomy dissolves. And that's the kind of thing that I think these people that operate with higher, they're running on 220. They can bring that into a situation. And these are often the people that we call the peacemakers. They're not peacemakers because they're soft, weak, passive, peaceful people. They're peacemakers because they have tremendous personal power and influence. And they can bring a higher energy into that situation, and the lower energy has no choice but to move to a higher vibration. I mean, that's the way, and these are kind of like allegorical models of what's going on, but you can see that, and this is a fair representation, I think. So and then there's a fair thing where this idea of, as population expands, the base of the pyramid equaling the height in a certain way, such that rather than thinking that all of the saints are in the past, all of the Mozarts, all of the religious geniuses, there's some argument to be made that there are as many alive now as have ever been alive through history. And so that the people that we need out there, they're there. But there is this process, right? Materiality is slow. We're building a butterfly out of these gooey caterpillar parts. So we're going to go through a process. It was just going to pop out at the end, or pop out immediately. But at the end of this process, I think we'll see it as the logical conclusion of everything that has gone before. And that's this omega point, Eshatan, the point at the end of history idea, I think. Um, so did that
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Maybe there's more to be said about cultivating personal power. Um, because one might hear your description as, if you're lucky enough to be operating on more cylinders, either because you were born that way and didn't have too much
right?
trauma dummy you up, then good for you. But I think a lot of us are in the condition of, well, it's a little late for me to maintain the belief that I might be one of those saints bringing world powers to the table. But at a lower degree or a lesser degree, I do want to play my part, and I think there are a lot of
Absolutely.
folks that want to play a part. And
right.
what does cultivating that look like?
Well, uh, I think that I don't think that people are necessarily just born that way. If they are, there's still a backstory like previous incarnations that they went through that that got them to that stage. I don't think it's a lottery winning situation, which I think sometimes people in the Christian tradition with this idea that grace is bestowed and that nothing you can do will bring grace upon you. I think that's a can be a problem, sort of a little trap there. But because I do think that there are things that we can do. Uh, one of the things that they say, and I'm trying to think of where this came from. It might have been Castaneda. This idea of erasing personal history, and that again, this idea of pulling up the nail, losing our little self, or the gravity of the little self that it has over our will, to try to expand past that, which means understanding ourselves, understanding our personalities, understanding the traumas we went through, uncovering within ourselves an honest, sincere desire for the fulfillment of the potential of the universe, for want of a better, if within some settings we might say God's plan, but I don't think this is exclusively a religious thing. I think this is an internal experience thing. And when I spoke about, I was very serious, even though I said it facetiously, when I said that for the universe to universe, it needs to you. And that's a very specific thing. And this idea is that you want to sincerely unfold what you as the universe envisioned you in your highest capacities. When I'm sitting in front of somebody in a ceremony and I'm singing for them, that's what I'm singing to. That's what I'm singing for, right? I'm singing for this flower to open as the creator intended. Define however you want. You're here. So something got you here. That's all we need. Through your internal experience, you have the capacity to unfold exactly what that means. That's what the great saints have told us. And I do believe that in my own experience, I find that reinforced. And that's this basic idea: seek and you will find, knock and it shall be opened unto you. But you still have to bring yourself to that. You still have to understand it. I think you need to uncover within yourself your sincerest desire for the good, as Plato would describe it, maybe. And to be operating, living out of that sincerest desire for the good. And and then like I love this there's a great New Yorker cartoon that we used to have up in the school. And there's this the sadhu sitting up, looking a lot like me actually, on the top of the mountain. And the guy climbs up to him, and the yogi says to him, "Grow in accordance with your inner directives, you asshole." And which, it's a joke and we say it like that, but there is an inner directive that you can unfold, you can uncover when you go looking for it, and when you ask, when you sincerely look for it. Uh, my experience is that the universe is responsive, and but that it just takes the right process, and your sincerity for the good, if we put it that way, is that, remember when we said that the gas behind the prayer is that emotional energy? Well, that emotional energy, that sincere desire for the good to unfold. Uh, Everybody knows what's beautiful in the world, right? Everybody knows the good stuff one way or the other before they get deflected. Or as we say, when someone gets really loses that capacity, they say in Spanish, "Él no conoce miel ni miel," right? He can't recognize the difference between honey and bile. That's what they're saying, both golden fluids, right? "Él no conoce miel ni miel." But in our natural state, we do. It's quite obvious the difference between honey and bile, right? And so we understand the aspects of the universe that manifest for us, which are the honey, the good things, right? The smiles and happiness of our children and the opening of flowers and the coming of spring and all that stuff, in your heart is right and good and true. Where does it come from? I don't know. Lao Tzu says something there was before the earth and sky began to be, veiled, aloof, alone. What does he say? I conceive it as the mother of the universe, right? Uh, it was before heaven and earth began to be. And that's this source, right? Or Dylan Thomas, that same green fuse which drives the plant, drives me, right? Famous Irish poet. Well, that sincere desire for the good, to use Plato's term, drives our prayers, drives our hopes for others, puts us in harmony with Hunyuan Chi, puts us as a co-worker in God's plan. Or, I would be interested in how the Rebbe would say that, because I know there's a correlate to this within the Hasidic traditions.
Yeah, I'm far too early in that journey to presume to speak for it,
Uh-huh,
for that
for sure.
tradition. Um, yeah, yeah, I think that's been a little bizarre for me. Is I feel like a total novice in ways all of a sudden. That's kind of what I meant by trying to get to the next energetic place and
Uh-huh.
sliding back and like actually that correlates with what we were talking about relative to the podcast yesterday about we did some demo episodes and we kind of got to a certain place and a lot of creative energy was expressed in that process, and now there's that image I always have at this stage of a project or a chapter transition of having rowed this boat away from shore, and now
Yeah.
I can't see the shore and I can't see the shore I'm headed towards, and there's like that ambiguity.
Yeah. You
Um,
brought the compass, right?
ah, I, yeah, I reckon there's a compass.
Yep.
Um,
And there's stars. It's the idea
yeah,
of the North Star, right?
yeah.
And or the pole star, which shows up in mystical literature also.
Yeah, and a belief in yin will, right? That
Uh-huh.
I have rowed this boat out into the middle of the ocean for a reason that I might not be able to fully grok yet, and that's
Right.
okay. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's that surrendering to your destiny, right? And a lot of philosophers have talked about that. I'm trying to think of which would leap into my mind, but this idea of acceptance of our destiny is huge. And but
I'm
you
not
have to
familiar.
understand it or come to terms with it first.
Yeah, this is just coming out of nowhere. Maybe it's a miss, but I've never read Spinoza, but his name has come up a number of times in these podcasts and
Yep.
elsewhere lately. So I'm like, okay, I guess I got to
Oh
read
yeah.
Spinoza.
Good old
Um,
Baruch.
what does he have to say about this?
Well, I can't speak for Spinoza, but I know Einstein liked him a lot. And, Spinoza sort of parts, as I understand it, sort of parts from traditional Judaism in for Spinoza, the universe is more impersonal. I'm not sure that within the Hebrew tradition there is a very long and rooted idea of a covenant, and which indicates a very special relationship. Uh, I don't know that Spinoza really believed that the creator of the universe was that personal, or was able to have that personal relationship. I guess I find myself somewhere in between the 2 because out of experience, I know that there is a potential for a personal relationship. On the other hand, I don't think it's very easy. Like, there is a process. So I don't think that and this is within the Christian tradition too, that somebody who came before me paid my tab. So now I don't need to necessarily go through like I used to see a bumper sticker that used to kind of annoy me, and it said, "Christians aren't perfect, they're just forgiven." It's like, well, that's okay as far as it goes, but that doesn't mean that that the rules of psychology and spiritual unfoldment and that none of that applies to you. You still have to, Jesus said, "I'm the path," but you have to walk the path. He said, "I'm the light," but that implies you seeing. And so I'm, and again, we spoke earlier of the idea of two different traditions in the Japanese, one meaning myself and power, and the other trusting others. And the trusting others is sort of relying on the words of saints and just hoping it all works out. I think the general tendency over a reading of history is a tendency towards more personal firsthand experience. That's what one of the big doctrines in the Reformation was this idea of the doctrine of universal priesthood. And the doctrine of universal priesthood says that every created human, and I would extend it, has a relationship with God and does not need the intervention of a priest. And I think that's the direction that things are heading. You know, we used to have kings who made all the decisions, and then we got this idea that people should vote. So there is this movement to individual realization and individual coming to fruition in the right settings. Um, but I don't think that we want the baby to go out with the bathwater. We don't need priests, but boy, teachers sure are helpful. And sometimes some people can help us in other capacities, not just by teaching us. So, and the point is, we don't really want someone to do our homework for us. We just want someone to help us so we get it, so we can do our own homework, right? And we can't collapse into complacency and say, well, someone else is going to pay it up for me. Uh, that from my reading of the situation, that's not why we're here. We're actually here to go through a process of the evolution of consciousness. And so you can't have someone else's consciousness evolving doesn't change your consciousness. Your consciousness has to evolve too. And how are we going to do that? Just by understanding more, by caring more, by feeling more, by taking on more, by all that. I think. I mean, that's the model that I have, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm really, having the experience now of um, wanting to take on more and knowing that both the definition of taking on and of more are changing, which is,
Sure.
to be expected in a transition.
Yeah. Well, and
Yeah,
compassion is part of what you're feeling here, which means literally, it comes from the word pathos, suffering, and compassion means to suffer with. Empathy is that same pathos and that same idea of feeling with. And the our capacity to feel with is fundamental to our ability to be in relationship. Um, so those are what this is a capacity that we want to grow. You know, uh, uh, we want to see that as a dimension of ourselves which is expandable, and we have some great examples of that. Some both living and dead.
you want to give one?
Oh, well, phew. Uh, one of my personal favorites was Stephen Biko. Uh, Stephen Biko, Peter Gabriel wrote a song about him. He was one of the leaders of the student movement in South Africa, who was killed in a prison, but who lit a fire that we would not have had a Mandela if we hadn't had a Biko. I think Bob Marley, as I mentioned, was somebody who was using his capacities to try to do care for more than just himself. Uh, and of course, all the saints of history. I heard the Baal Shem Tov described as a Jewish Jedi master. So I think that actually history has a lot of these characters that give us a glimpse of the perfectibility of the human race and the potential, and that's not something that we should be cynical about. I mean, I think that it, uh, it should be the thing that everything else is there to support. Why are you having breakfast? Because of your potential perfectibility. Like right? So when I say that's the only game in town, that's kind of what I mean. There's some people like to say we're all walking each other home. And I think that that is true, but I think that it's somewhat like Dorothy ending up home in Kansas. She's home, but it's not the same Dorothy, and it's not the same Kansas even, right? So yeah, there's something going on here for sure. And there's a whole interesting conversation on that topic of the fallen state of humanity. And this is the back way into the conversation of current events. We are experiencing our fallen state. They said that in the 60s, the Black Panthers occupied the office of the dean at St. John's College in Annapolis, Maryland. And they ask him, these questions about what's going on. What's the problem here? Why are we having all these civil rights issues? Why is man born free and everywhere in chains? Rousseau said, right? And the dean, who I believe at the time was Catholic, said that the problem was original sin. And if you understand what that fallen state is, and this is something that's interesting to do comparative studies in religions about, they all religions sort of say that something maybe has gone off the tracks here a little bit, and they all seem to say that there is an on the tracks condition that maybe is superior to what we're experiencing. This idea of bringing heaven down on earth, uh, but we're only going to manifest on the outside what we've managed to clarify on the inside. So we're in this growing process, right? So even though there's a lot of gnashing of teeth, I'm very optimistic. Uh, we're all here. We're all going to leave. So the important thing is that we optimize that evolution of consciousness through the process. That's the way that I read it. And I mean, I'm not going to make an absolute statement about reincarnation, but as I've said before, it seems like there's an awful long curriculum to get through in just one run without a few respawns. So, uh, you know, and Plato said even also to fear death is to pretend to know something that we don't know.
Mhm.
Chuang-Tzu said the same thing. They asked him when his wife had died, he was out in the backyard beating a drum and singing. And his friend showed up, like, dude, what are you doing? Your wife just died. And he has a very, very, one of his most famous passages on the transitoriness of life is where he says, I don't know where she came from before she came here to be with me. And I don't know where she's going. So to presume that it's bad is kind of to act like you know something that we don't really know. And I mean, the Tibetans talk about their tulkus, which is a person that was consciously reborn, and there's a lot of stuff around that. So I find it pretty compelling. Uh, but in either case, it doesn't matter because we're here now this time and you got to optimize this time, you know. This is why I'm always encouraging people. You got to operate with virtue, optimize your virtue. That's part of how you up your game. You play to a higher net. Don't think that the morality that applies to other people should apply to you. You should hold yourself to a higher standard, right? Uh, you should hold yourself to the campground rule. Make sure you leave things in a better condition than you found them, you know?
Maybe let's finish on a question. I don't know if you've said this to me in any of our recordings, but you've certainly said it to me, and I think specifically in ceremonies over the years, and that's who feels this suffering, and where does that come from, and what does it mean to you?
That came from my Zen master, uh, Joshu Sasaki Roshi, who became quite controversial after I had flown the coop already, after I checked out of Roshi's hospital. Uh, he said that when you're sitting, you know, in the process in the Zen center where I lived, it wasn't really a monastery because it was in a city. So the idea was, can we do a hybrid thing where people can live lives in the city and go and do jobs and things, but then still have some of the flavor of a monastic circumstance? So you know, we would do regular sitting early in the morning, and there was a regular kind of a communal food thing, and you know, but periodically you would do what was called a sesshin. In a sesshin, it like starts early in the morning. You're sitting in sessions intermixed with walking meditation to keep your legs functioning and doing there's a day show, which is a lecture by the master, usually every day in the afternoon. But then you also do 4 personal interviews with the master. And that's when the koans, the riddles are given, and that's when you try to answer them and all of that. And so the sitting can be extreme. It can be excruciating, and your knees can hurt. You know, I mean, you go through some changes. Zen is not an easy path. Okay, and so when people were suffering, which it was physical suffering, uh, Roshi would tell you, well, ask yourself who feels this pain. And this is exactly the same direction that Ramana Maharishi gives when he says, ask yourself, who am I? And you can become enlightened. This is that mystery of identity, right? And and the things that grow out of that identity, like will, like intent, like compassion, like insight, that are all wrapped up in that. And so so he would say, who feels this pain as a way to sort of unfold it and to convert the negative experiences of life into realization, which is what we want. Uh, so, and it, you know, and it has this other balancing. Like, yeah, there's aspects of suffering to it, but I can still remember getting into the Zendo really early, and we would have a cup of tea, and it was really cold in the Zendo, bare wooden floors. You're sitting on your zafu or your cushion, and we would get the cup of tea, and the cup of tea was so warm, and I would hold it in my hands and just try to get every little bit, and the joy and pleasure in this cup of tea was ridiculous, you know? And but somehow it was contextualized by everything else, and it focused your awareness on that in a very, you know, unique way. And, so I really loved my time there, although it was not, you know, other chapters called really fast. And, and I knew when the train was at the station, I had to get on it. So, but I did really like those times, and I felt like I felt more from it maybe than I understood, you know? I didn't solve the koan, right? Uh, I thought that I understood what he was getting at, and now, uh some of the conversations that we've had about the semantic world and the real world and all those were definitely informed by that experience. And by Roshi explaining to me that, when I'm going to give you, I give you what my first koan was, right? My only koan, right? He whacked a piece of wood with a stick, and he said, "Did you hear that?" Like, yeah. He says, "When you heard it, the Buddha heard it too. How do you realize the Buddha? Through the sound of the wood." And another whack. That's it. Okay, off you go. Work on it. It's like, and the parts that he explained to me was that you don't choose to hear the sound. Unlike vision, where we look, we choose what we see and what we don't see. We can look away, but sound is not like that. Sound, you just hear it. You're not exercising ego to hear it, and so the sound hears you maybe more because of that more passive nature rather than visually when we pick things apart and we direct it very much with our conscious will. Um, so that was involved. I think the closest I ever got was when he made the sound, I made a sound. And he said, "Oh, good, but wrong." So it was a fascinating chapter. I can close my eyes. I'll be right back there in that Zendo because it was it was an everyday, regular, and but that's where that comes from. Who feels this pain? And uh, you know, these are all ways to reveal ourself. Uh, and our attachment to things and what's real about us and what it was conjured in the semantic world so that we can have a personhood to be a vehicle to move in the world. Somehow we this steps past all that, you know. Like someone I knew that used to do what they called street therapy in Berkeley. Somebody'd walk by and he would toss out a comment that hooked him in. And one of them I heard about, he tells the guy, give me your wallet, tells the guy. The guy gives him his wallet. And he starts looking through driver's license, credit card, all the accoutrements. He says, "Is this who you think you are?" Right? And this is that same sort of an idea. And this is kind of what the Zen master would try to do is throw back at you differences between who you are and who you have taken on to be a person in the world.
Mm,
And, yeah, all that stuff is, just more consciousness, more awareness. Yeah,
yeah,
so
cool. Well, thank you, Brian. I
absolutely.
appreciated the conversation.
Yeah, I mean, I hope we swung the flashlight around there. I don't know how many gems we sparkled, but we swung it around some.
Yeah, we never know.
Yeah, and this too shall pass, you know, individually, collectively, like in chapters. We go through these chapters and we come out of them in a different place. So,
Amen.
yeah, absolutely.